Welcome to today's deep dive. If you're that person who is constantly trying to figure out how the chaotic gears of Washington actually turn, beyond the sound bites and the spin, you are in the exact right place.
Absolutely.
Because today, our mission is to unpack a single highly charged source. We are breaking down a really detailed YouTube commentary video by Ron Yates that analyzes the explosive removal of Representative Ilhan Omar from the House Foreign Affairs Committee.
Yeah, and before we really get into the weeds here, let's just set the table for you, the listener. Because, this video deals with some intense partisan clashes.
Oh, yeah. Very raw political nerves.
Right. So our job today is absolutely not to take a side or, tell you who is right or wrong.
Yeah.
Our goal is strictly to put this creator's arguments under a microscope.
Yeah.
So you can see the mechanics at play.
Exactly. We are dissecting the anatomy of a political firestorm. We're just synthesizing the viewpoints presented in the video without endorsing any of the underlying politics. Consider us your impartial guides through the political machinery.
Well said.
And speaking of that machinery, there's usually this expectation of order when it comes to congressional procedure, right? You picture this dry, highly structured environment.
Right. Someone reads a resolution, members log their votes, the gavel bangs.
And everyone just moves on to the next item on the docket.
Yeah, the process is literally designed to be formal and predictable. The strict rules of decorum exist specifically to keep the temperature in the room manageable, even when the topics are, incredibly contentious.
But the video we are analyzing today paints a picture of a moment that completely shattered that machinery. What should have been a standard procedural vote transformed into this massive narrative collision.
Yeah, a total breakdown.
The creator describes a scene on the House floor where the polite veneer of government just vanished. It was replaced by voices raised, lawmakers talking over each other. It felt more like a chaotic Thanksgiving family argument that went way too far.
It really did.
It was a level of visceral conflict that bypassed policy entirely and went straight for the jugular. So, how does a committee shuffle turn into a national spectacle? To understand the explosion, we first have to look at the exact spark that lit the fuse.
Right, so let's lay out the factual baseline from the source. Minnesota Democrat Ilhan Omar was officially stripped of her seat on the House Foreign Affairs Committee. The mechanism for this was a strict party line floor vote. The final tally was 218 to 211. Oh, and with one member answering present.
Okay, let's unpack this because I actually want to pause on that present vote for a second. That is one of those Washington quirks that I think often confuses people.
Yeah, it definitely does.
Like, why wouldn't a representative just vote yes or no?
So voting present is a highly calculated parliamentary maneuver. Mechanically, it means the member is physically on the floor, to be counted for a quorum, but they're actively refusing to endorse the action or the opposition. Strategically, politicians use this when they might agree with the underlying premise of a vote, but strongly object to the process being used to execute it, or vice versa.
Oh, okay.
It's basically a way to register a protest without handing either party a definitive soundbite to use against them in the next election cycle.
That makes total sense. It's a defensive play, but the result of the overall vote was definitive. And losing a seat on this specific committee is a massive blow. This isn't just being reassigned to a different subcommittee on agricultural standards or something.
Not at all.
Getting kicked off foreign affairs is like being ousted from the executive board of a global corporation. This committee controls access to highly classified intelligence briefings. They oversee international diplomatic funding and literally shape the country's posture on war and alliances.
Which is exactly why the commentator emphasizes that this was not a routine administrative reshuffling. There was no slow phase out or quiet transition.
Right. It was immediate.
It was a sudden, blunt dismissal. A move the video actually characterized as a Gone by Felicia moment. Yeah. The abruptness was a deliberate message. When leadership pulls a representative from a committee of this magnitude, they're intentionally revoking that person's megaphone on the world stage.
The action itself was undeniable, but the narrative of why it happened is where the video points out a complete fracturing of reality, depending entirely on which side of the aisle you look at.
Totally different realities.
Yeah. Let's examine the Republican argument first, which the commentary frames entirely around the concept of objective accountability.
Right, so the right-wing perspective presented here is laser-focused on past statements and the standard for disqualification. The primary justification cited by Republicans centered on inflammatory remarks Representative Omar made in 2019 regarding Israel.
the tweet.
Exactly. The commentary specifically highlights a tweet where she wrote, "It's all about the Benjamin's baby," which was widely interpreted as suggesting that Jewish people and AIPAC, which is the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, were essentially buying political support in Washington.
And the creator notes that the rhetorical response from the GOP was incredibly severe. I mean, GOP Representative Tom Emmer is quoted in the source calling Omar the face of anti-Semitism in the Democratic Party.
Yeah, it was a heavy accusation.
But they didn't just rely on partisan attacks to build their case, right? They utilized precedent?
Yes, and that is the mechanical crux of the Republican argument. To legitimize the removal, they pointed to the former Democratic chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee, Eliot Engel.
Oh, interesting.
Engel had previously stated on the record that such comments have no place in the Foreign Affairs Committee or the House of Representatives.
So they used his exact words.
Right. By using a prominent Democrat's own words, the GOP attempted to establish this sort of nonpartisan, objective standard. The argument basically being, if the previous Democratic chairman said these biases disqualify someone from serving as an objective decision-maker on national security, then removing her is simply enforcing an established rule.
Got it. But then the video pivots to the left-wing counter-narrative. And the defense isn't about parsing the nuances of foreign policy or debating the mechanics of lobbying.
Not at all.
Members of the Progressive Squad representatives, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Rashida Tlaib, and Ayanna Pressley, they took to the floor with an entirely different framework. They argued about identity.
Correct. The commentary outlines how the Democratic defense bypassed the 2019 tweet entirely. Instead, they framed the removal as a continuation of the disgusting legacies after 9/11.
Right.
They argued the maneuver was rooted explicitly in racism, Islamophobia, and a targeted incitement of violence against a Muslim immigrant woman of color.
Yeah, the source points out Omar herself leaned into this. She pointed to her history as a 9-year-old refugee and declared she would not be silenced by a system she views as inherently biased.
Exactly.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because the creator is showing us two groups of people sitting in the exact same theater, watching the exact same movie, but screaming at each other over the genre.
That's a great way to put it.
Right. One side is utterly convinced they are watching a procedural legal drama about accountability, and the other side insists, with equal passion, that it's a tragic documentary about systemic bias.
Right. They aren't even having the same conversation.
But let me push back on this framework for a second. If we stop debating the actual text of a tweet or the text of a policy, and we only debate the hidden biases or the souls of the people voting, aren't we just guaranteeing permanent gridlock?
Oh, absolutely.
Because you can't legislate someone's internal intent. Doesn't shifting the argument to identity make actual resolution impossible?
I think you're hitting on the exact thesis the commentary is driving at. What's fascinating here is that the video argues that making resolution impossible isn't an accident. It is the strategic goal.
Wow.
Once identity enters the conversation, the debate over objective facts is entirely drowned out by emotion. And in modern politics, emotion travels much faster and, frankly, raises much more money than complex policy explanations.
I see the strategy, but it feels like a massive gamble to abandon policy debate entirely.
It is a gamble, but it creates a trap for the opposition. As the creator points out, if you criticize the committee's decision to remove her, you are immediately labeled as ignoring discrimination or enabling bigotry.
Right.
But if you support the decision, you are labeled as perpetuating systemic racism. The space for debating the actual merits of committee assignments just vanishes.
It's completely gone.
The electorate stops asking, what specific decisions led to this?
Yeah.
And is instead forced to ask, which moral side are you on?
And once it becomes a moral binary like that, it spills out of the Capitol building. A procedural vote mutates into this massive national argument on social media about fairness, power, and representation.
Exactly.
Which leads to a really fascinating tactical observation made in the video regarding how the GOP handled that emotional eruption on the floor.
Yes. So while the Democratic squad was highly vocal and emotional, the commentary notes that critics aligned with the GOP adopted a very specific, time-tested political strategy.
Which is?
When your opponent is making a mistake, let them keep talking.
Wow. So they just let the microphone stay open.
Exactly. In the modern attention economy, whoever is loudest gets the viral clip. The video suggests that the GOP strategists sat back and watched because they believed the squad's rhetoric was actually doing the right wing's work for them.
Let me stop you there, because how does letting your opponent dominate the news cycle help you? I mean, usually politicians fight tooth and nail for airtime.
Well, mechanically, it's about base mobilization versus alienating swing voters. The commentary argues that the views championed by the squad, which critics frame as support for open borders, socialism, and policies that view free enterprise as a moral negative, clash heavily with mainstream moderate America.
Ah, I see.
By refusing to interrupt, the GOP allowed the Democrats to own this highly emotional identity-first visual. The critics' bet was that letting this dominate the airwaves would actually fracture the Democratic Party from within.
By forcing moderate Democrats to answer for the most extreme rhetoric of their colleagues.
Exactly.
It is a strategic silence. You just step back, let the chaos play out, and let the opponent become the face of dysfunction.
Yep.
And the video points out that we have to look at the atmospheric pressure of Washington right now to understand why this works. Because this is all unfolding with Donald Trump back in the White House.
Which acts as a massive accelerant to the entire system.
The environment is described as sharper, faster, and way less patient. The stakes are higher. Under a Trump administration, the news cycle is measured in hours, not days. So how does that hyper-partisan climate change the mechanics of a congressional fight?
It changes the speed of perception. In a highly charged environment, voters just don't have the patience for a white paper explanation of foreign policy precedent. The chaos itself becomes the message.
Right, they just see the yelling.
Exactly. When average voters sitting at home watch lawmakers screaming at each other over identity, the strategic bet from the right is that the viewer won't see a righteous defense of minority rights. They will simply see dysfunction. They see a soap opera and wonder who is actually steering the ship.
But just when you think this entire situation is going to remain a philosophical battle about identity politics and foreign affairs, the opponent's strategy shifts gears entirely.
Yeah, a huge pivot.
When political rhetoric fails to land a knockout blow, strategists pivot to the one thing that always sticks: paperwork. The video reveals that the scrutiny suddenly took a hard left turn into Representative Omar's personal finances and taxes.
This is a textbook escalation. The narrative drops the foreign policy debate entirely and zeroes in on domestic, personal vulnerabilities. The commentary details a wave of allegations surrounding Omar's financial filings, specifically pointing to questions about her tax filing status, inconsistencies regarding her marriage timeline, and whether certain filings improperly reduced her tax liability.
So what does this all mean? How do we mechanically get from a screaming match on the House floor about Israel to a granular investigation into someone's tax returns? What is the actual causal link there?
It's the pipeline of political opposition research. High-profile floor fights act like a flare in the night sky. They signal opposition research firms, partisan watchdog groups, and investigative journalists to start digging into a politician's public records.
Oh, wow.
And when these groups find anomalies, they don't just tweet about them, they file formal complaints at the state and federal level.
Which forces the hands of regulatory bodies. The video mentions the Minnesota Campaign Finance Board getting involved, flagging issues with campaign funds, legal expenses, and travel accounting.
Precisely. A state finance board doesn't typically launch an investigation unprompted. They are legally obligated to investigate credible, formal complaints filed by these outside groups. That is the mechanical bridge from a DC microphone to a local audit.
That is wild. If we connect this to the bigger picture, this fundamentally changes the gravity of the scandal. Politicians are experts at navigating political vulnerability, right? They can spin a fiery speech, they can fundraise off of an insult, and they can debate identity all day long. But legal vulnerability is entirely different. You cannot out-rhetoric a W-2 or a campaign finance ledger.
And this is exactly why taxes are the ultimate political weapon. The video emphasizes that once you introduce oversight groups and the Internal Revenue Service into the equation, the timeline of the scandal extends indefinitely.
Yeah, the IRS doesn't send friendly check-in emails. They send threatening paperwork.
Exactly. Furthermore, this outside pressure led to calls for formal investigations by the United States House Ethics Committee.
Which is an entirely different beast than a floor debate. The House Ethics Committee has subpoena power. They can compel testimony under oath. They can make criminal referrals to the Department of Justice.
Right.
Once they are invoked, alongside tens of thousands of people signing petitions demanding your finances be investigated, it ceases to be a political headache and becomes a potential career-ending threat.
It replaces a subjective debate with objective math. The public might tune out a complex debate over the jurisdiction of the Foreign Affairs Committee, but every single voter understands the concept of money, taxes, and rules.
Oh, yeah. You know how stressful a simple tax audit is?
Yeah.
Imagine that multiplied by the weight of a national political scandal.
Exactly. The core question for the average voter becomes incredibly simple, black and white. If there are rules for the rest of us, are the people in power following them?
It brings this lofty, abstract Washington fight crashing down to earth. Critics can suddenly point fingers and say, you are advocating for higher taxes and stricter regulations on everyday Americans, but what is going on with your own ledgers?
Right.
It is a devastating pivot because it attacks credibility not on policy, but on basic, relatable compliance.
And that brings us to the ultimate synthesis of what this commentary is trying to convey. The creator isn't just recounting the play-by-play of a chaotic congressional week. They are using this specific, explosive timeline to highlight a broader national shift in the electorate.
Yeah, the argument from the source is that underneath all the shouting, the identity politics, and the tax allegations, there is a fundamental exhaustion building within the public. The video claims this moment exposes a growing demand from voters to move away from identity-first political theater. At the end of the day, the commentator argues that voters are less concerned with the demographic makeup of a committee and more concerned with actual governance. They are asking, does this legislation affect my life? How does this impact my family's bottom line?
The thesis is that the sheer volume and chaos of these identity-based clashes are forcing a societal course correction. It's pushing the electorate to demand grounded, policy-driven results, punishing politicians who prioritize emotional performance art over tangible legislative action.
And this is exactly why this matters to you. Whether you're prepping for a political science seminar, trying to cut through the noise of your newsfeed, or simply wanting to be an informed citizen, this event is a masterclass in modern political mechanics.
It really is.
It shows you exactly how narratives are built and weaponized by both sides. It demonstrates how emotion is intentionally utilized to bypass factual explanation. And it proves how a single procedural vote can act as a lightning rod, triggering a chain reaction from floor speeches to state-level financial audits, illuminating the country's deepest divides along the way.
It completely strips away the illusion of Washington as this quiet boardroom and reveals the actual tactical warfare underneath. It's a reminder that in politics, the debate you see on camera is rarely the actual fight. The real fight is over who gets to define the terms of the debate.
We started this deep dive by looking at how the orderly machinery of government broke down into a narrative collision. We saw how quickly a debate over a tweet morphed into a battle over personal identity, and finally into a granular attack on legal and financial compliance.
Which leaves us with a critical lingering question, one that goes far beyond Ilhan Omar, the Republican strategist, or the Democratic squad.
It is the question we want you to mull over long after this audio ends. In an era where political debates are increasingly fought over personal identity and perceived internal intentions, rather than objective, measurable policy actions, how can any democratic body ever establish a shared reality long enough to actually govern?
If the two sides can't even agree on what genre of movie they're watching, how can they possibly be expected to write the ending together?
Think about that the next time a viral political fight takes over your timeline. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the mechanics of Washington. Stay curious, and we will catch you next time.